What is the first locomotive model that comes to your mind when someone mentions the old KCS? For many, it would be something modern like the EMD SD70 ACE or the General Electric Evolution series. Maybe it's the KCS 1, 2, and 3, or maybe it's something in the old White Ghost paint scheme. Maybe it's something in the Battleship Gray. Maybe it's something as simple as a Jeep. I could go on for a while here. In today's video, I'm willing to bet that several of the locomotives that I'm about to cover are nobody's first thought. While the railroad had a majority of common locomotive models on its roster throughout its history, there are plenty of unique locomotives that several people would consider odd. Welcome back to What Once Was, where we dive into various topics of what the railroads of North Louisiana and surrounding areas were like in decades past. In today's video, we'll be covering what some may consider oddball locomotive models that served under the KCS flag. We're going to start the video off all the way back when steam was king. The humble KCS that stemmed from Arthur Stilwell's vision to connect the Midwest to the Gulf of Mexico didn't have as many unique steam configurations as other roads. Nonetheless, it was still a very interesting roster, with massive 210-4s, two 880s, and several other common wheel types such as Pacifics or 10-wheelers. There were two locomotives that I considered to be outliers within the KCS steam roster, those being number 900 and 901. In 1913, the Llama Locomotive Works received an order from the KCS for a pair of 3-trucked geared shay locomotives. Now, most people, including myself, would normally associate the shays as working deep within the North American forests on logging roads, but the KCS would utilize theirs for the industrial districts of Kansas City. Despite being an urban environment, the branch lines that these locomotives served on saw tight curves and tough grades, right up a shay locomotive's alley. The 900 was the bigger of the two shays, and at the time of its construction, it was the biggest shay locomotive built by Llama. While that title would be taken away years later, the 900 was still measured at an impressive 52 feet and 11 inches long, with 18 by 20 inch cylinders that contributed to a whopping 74,000 pounds of tractive effort. While sister locomotive 901 was smaller, both of these geared locomotives were in charge of local jobs in the warehouse district for 15 years until the eventual scrapping of both of them in 1928. The early era of diesels must have been a very interesting one to cover. As the railroads moved away from steam, they would have to test the waters with several different diesel manufacturers and find out which one they preferred. The reputations of the EMD or GE locomotives had yet to grow, and it wasn't clear if steam manufacturers such as Baldwin or Alco could effectively produce diesel power. While the KCS would mostly ride with EMD until the late 1990s, they had their fair share of unique locomotives from other manufacturers. Shortly after the Second World War in 1946, a variety of diesel locomotive builders would be sending their models to the railroad. The Baldwin Locomotive Works built many a steam engine for the KCS. Unfortunately, Baldwin was not able to survive with the new era of diesels, but they did make an attempt. Only 5 locomotives built by Baldwin would have a presence on the KCS roster. In May of 1946, the KCS bought a single Baldwin VO660 switcher. The switcher only had a horsepower rating of 660, which was significantly lower than EMD's NW2 switcher with its 1,000 horsepower. A fun fact is that the KCS would purchase the last one ever built, and it was numbered 1150. The small switcher model did not have the greatest success story, as many roads opted to send them to EMD to rebuild them into SW900 specifications. The KCS Superintendent of Machinery stated in the late 1950s that there was no interest in rebuilding the 1150, along with the other 4 Baldwin locomotives on the roster. The 1150 had a unique feature that wasn't seen in most other examples of the model type. Notice the 4 exhaust stacks on top. Most VO660s only had a large single stack just in front of the cab. Only a handful of the VO660 models would survive the scrapper's torch. and unfortunately, the KCS 1150 would not be one of them. While not scrapped by the railroad itself, it was sold off to a new owner whose sole intention was to salvage any usable parts and the rest would be discarded. The other 4 Baldwin locomotives that were purchased by KCS were the S12 model. S12s were of vast improvement horsepower-wise compared to the VO660 with an output of 1200 horsepower. From research that I gathered, these S12s seem to primarily handle switching duties in the Kansas City area, only ever leaving the KC terminal for maintenance work at the facilities in Pittsburgh, Kansas. They were numbered 1160 through 1163. The quartet of S12s received by the KCS were built in 1951, but quickly were seen as unfavorable engines for train crews. Early generator and other electrical issues would result in the S12s being banned from any heavy-duty jobs, where once again, EMD's NW2 model outshined them with a smaller horsepower output. After 17 years of service to the KCS, the S12s would be retired in 1968 and traded to EMD for a partial credit to the upcoming order of the giant SD40. EMD found itself bringing in unreal amounts of revenue after the end of World War II. With war production restrictions lifted, just about every railroad was in a rush to replace steam with diesel motive power. KCS was no different, being impressed with their slick E-units and NW2 switchers. Though when reaching out to EMD for an order, there was a backlog upward to 2 years. The need for new power was the highest priority. Aside from the 1937-built J-Class Texas types, the steam power being utilized ranged anywhere from 2 to 4 decades old. Despite wanting to stay loyal to EMD, the railroad was forced to find a builder who could ensure reasonable delivery time to aid the power crisis. This is where Fairbanks Morse would enter the picture. A 4-unit set of Eerie builds were purchased in 1946. These included 60A and 60B, paired with 61A and 62B. Each motor had an impressive horsepower rating of 2,000, making national headlines on their inaugural run with a total of 8,000 horsepower leading freight down the main line. KCS was the first to receive Eerie built specifically designed for freight duties, with other roads utilizing these distinctive motor for passenger service. The set of 4 engines would have the same tractive effort as a J-Class, or 2 of the articulated 2880 G-Class, which was a total of 240,000 pounds. They couldn't come sooner because when delivered in December of '46, the Eerie builds went straight to work between Pittsburgh and DeQueen. A coal miner strike led the KCS to skipping the ceremonies planned and also road testing. 2 more A units were purchased shortly after the initial introduction to the KCS, being numbered as 60C and 61C. 62A and 62C were another pair of A units purchased to be utilized for the LNA. These saw action on freight runs from Shreveport to New Orleans, but also passenger service from Shreveport to Port Arthur. Despite aiding the power shortage, the Eerie builds also had considerable mechanical issues, with several major failures recorded in their years of service being linked to the prime movers. As EMD finally fulfilled KCS orders of F3 and F7 locomotives, the Eerie builds were pulled from service and sent to EMD to be rebuilt with EMD 576 prime movers. 2 of the Eerie builds would be scrapped, with one still having a pure FM interior and the other being a EMD rebuild. The rest of the Eerie builds would meet the same fate as the Baldwin S12s, traded to EMD for the upcoming SD40 order. These were not the only Fairbanks Morse built locomotives to be purchased by the KCS. In 1949, KCS acquired 2 H1544 road switchers. Numbered 40 and number 41 were assigned to passenger service and came equipped with steam generators. They were delivered in the vibrant Southern Belle paint scheme and would be the only road switchers to sport it until the SW1500s received the paint in the late 2000s when the Retro Belle paint scheme was introduced. These pair of switchers would work passenger trains between Shreveport and New Orleans, along with the Shreveporter that ran between its namesake city and Hope, Arkansas. Though to no surprise, these switchers weren't exactly the best option for passenger service, being quickly reassigned to local freight jobs in Pittsburgh. The 41 would be sent to EMD and would come back as a very odd-looking GP9, as the 40 would remain a pure FM product. 40 was scrapped in the mid-60s, but the rebuilt 41 lasted until 1971, though it's worth noting that the 41 was renumbered to 45 to avoid conflicting with train numbers at some point in its career. Only 9 Alco diesels would ever wear the KCS lettering. 4 were built new, while the remaining 5 were second-hand. The 4 new engines came in the form of the Alco RS1 Light Road Switcher, numbered 1110 through 1113. All 4 engines were built in 1943 during the wartime. It's believed that these 4 Alcos were allocated to the KCS since the road was swamped with military traffic and scrambled to lease second-hand steam engines. The RS1s were the first locomotives on the fleet to have multiple unit configurations for larger freight trains and worked between Pittsburgh and Watts, Oklahoma, and also Heavener and DeQueen. Like the other oddballs in this video, these Alcos had their fair share of issues. These motors could not maintain consistent speeds with the heavier mainline trains, so management reassigned the motors to local work in Texas and yard transfer jobs in Shreveport. Eventually, upon the arrival of more F units, the RS1s were sent to Kansas City for switching operations until retirement called in 1954. 4 second-hand Alcos in the HH or High Hood series found themselves on the KCS for a short period of time. KCS simply acquired a single HH900 and 3 HH1000s because they were a very good deal and came in excellent condition from their previous owners. The HH900 was numbered as 1120, while the HH1000s were 1121, 1122, and 1123. The main distinction between the HH900 and the HH1000 was the 100 horsepower difference. All 4 of the HH series were also included in the 1960s trade to EMD for, once again, you guessed it, the SD40. A single Alco S2 was also purchased second-hand by KCS, but I couldn't find much information on its career, minus the fact that it served the KC Terminal Railroad before landing on the KCS. It was delivered to the railroad in 1967, and was the only Alco locomotive to wear the white paint scheme. For a long portion of its career, it remained in storage due to several mechanical issues. KCS would return the Alco in 1971. Well, y'all, that's all I got for today's edition of What Once Was. I gotta say that these oddballs were one of my favorite things that I've researched so far, so I really hope that this video is informative to many of you. I'm always open to suggestions on what to cover in this series, especially if it relates to the KCS or other roads that were significant to Louisiana. So if you got an idea, leave it down in the comments below. Until the next time, my friends, I'll be seeing you somewhere out there along the rails, and as always, thanks for watching.